The funeral was a lie. Detective Sarah Chen stared at the surveillance footage from the abandoned warehouse, her coffee growing cold in her trembling hands. There, captured in grainy black and white, was the unmistakable silhouette of her brother Marcus. The same brother she had buried 3 months ago after identifying his mangled body in the morgue. But here he was, alive, walking through shadows like a ghost made flesh. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., just 6 hours ago. The same night someone had murdered 3 people in the warehouse district, leaving behind a calling card that made Sarah's blood freeze. A photograph of herself, sleeping peacefully in her own bed, with a single word scrawled across the back in Marcus's distinctive handwriting: soon. Sarah's partner, Detective James Rodriguez, burst through her office door, his face pale with urgency. "Chen, we need to talk. The DNA results from the warehouse scene. You're not going to believe this." "Let me guess," Sarah said, never taking her eyes off the frozen frame of her supposedly dead brother. "It's a match for Marcus." James stopped dead in his tracks. "How did you—" "Because I've been watching him on camera for the past hour." She finally turned, and James saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Raw, primal fear. "My brother didn't die in that car accident, James. Someone wanted us to think he did. The question is who, and why?" The phone on Sarah's desk rang, its shrill tone cutting through the tension like a blade. She hesitated, knowing with supernatural certainty that answering would change everything. On the 5th ring, she picked up. "Hello, sister." Marcus's voice was exactly as she remembered, but colder, stripped of the warmth she'd grown up with. "Did you miss me, Marcus?" Her voice cracked. "Where have you been?" "We buried you. I identified your body." You identified what they wanted you to see," he interrupted. "But that's not important right now. What matters is that you have something I need, Sarah. Something you took from me without even knowing it." "I don't understand." "The Blackwood case files. You remember, don't you? The ones you removed from evidence lockup the night before I died?" Sarah's world tilted. The Blackwood case. A series of ritualistic murders that had consumed Marcus's final months as a detective. She had taken the files, yes, but only because internal affairs was closing in on Marcus, questioning his methods, his mental state. She'd hidden them to protect his legacy. "How do you know about—" "Because I've been watching you, Sarah. Just like they've been watching both of us. The only difference is now I know who they are." A long pause stretched between them, filled with the weight of 3 months of grief and guilt. "Meet me tonight. Pier 47, midnight. Come alone and bring the files. If you don't—" His voice took on a chilling quality. "Well, let's just say those 3 bodies in the warehouse were just the appetizer." The line went dead. James had been listening to every word, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon. "Sarah, this is insane. We need to call this in. Get back up." "No!" Her voice was steel. If Marcus is alive, if he's involved in whatever this is, then someone very powerful wanted him gone. Someone with access to the morgue, to official records, to— She stopped, a horrible realization dawning. "James, who signed off on closing the Blackwood case?" "Captain Morrison. Why?" Sarah was already moving toward the evidence lockup, her mind racing. Captain Morrison, who had fast-tracked Marcus's funeral arrangements. Morrison, who had personally overseen the body identification. Morrison, who had been so eager to let sleeping dogs lie when it came to the Blackwood murders. "Because I think we've been playing the wrong game entirely," she muttered, pulling out her keycard. "And I think Marcus figured it out just before he was supposed to die." The evidence lockup was eerily quiet at 4 p.m., long shadows stretching across the rows of metal shelving like grasping fingers. Sarah had dismissed the duty officer with a fabricated story about updating case records, knowing she needed to examine the Blackwood files without prying eyes. What she found made her question everything she thought she knew about her brother's final case. The official files were thin, too thin for a case that had spanned 8 months and involved 7 victims. But hidden beneath the standard reports, Marcus had created a shadow investigation, complete with photographs, interview transcripts, and connections that painted a picture so disturbing it made Sarah's hands shake. The Blackwood murders weren't random. They were executions. Each victim had been a potential witness in a case that would have exposed a conspiracy, reaching into the highest levels of the police department, the district attorney's office, and the mayor's inner circle. The ritualistic elements, the symbols carved into flesh, the strategic placement of bodies, weren't the work of a serial killer. They were designed to make the murders look like the work of a madman, disguising systematic elimination as random violence. Marcus had been close to exposing it all. Too close. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check evidence box 247B. Look for the red envelope. Trust no one at the station. Box 247B was supposed to contain evidence from a drug bust 6 months ago. Instead, Sarah found a single red envelope containing photographs that made her stomach lurch. Captain Morrison shaking hands with Vincent Blackwood, the businessman whose name had been given to the case. Morrison entering a private club known for its connections to organized crime. Morrison signing documents that Sarah couldn't quite make out, but looked suspiciously like financial records. And at the bottom of the stack, a photograph that stopped her heart. Marcus, very much alive, walking out of the morgue through a service entrance 3 months ago, supported by 2 men in dark suits. Her brother had been extracted, not killed. But by whom? And why had he let her believe he was dead? Find what you were looking for, Detective Chen? Sarah spun around to find Captain Morrison standing in the doorway, his usually friendly demeanor replaced by something cold and calculating. Behind him stood 2 officers Sarah didn't recognize, internal affairs badges gleaming on their lapels. Captain, I was just destroying evidence in an ongoing investigation, compromising a federal task force operation, or maybe just trying to cover up your brother's crimes. Morrison stepped closer and Sarah noticed his hand resting on his service weapon. Did you really think we didn't know about Marcus's little insurance policy? What are you talking about? Morrison smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Your brother was always too clever for his own good. When he started connecting dots that weren't meant to be connected, we gave him a choice. Disappear quietly or disappear permanently. He chose option A, contingent on keeping his mouth shut forever. Then why is he back? Because someone broke the agreement. Someone stole files that were supposed to stay buried. Morrison's voice turned deadly. Someone like you, Detective Chen. The 2 internal affairs officers moved to flank her, and Sarah realized with growing horror that she was trapped. The evidence lockup had become a tomb, and she was the guest of honor at her own funeral. The funny thing about insurance policies, Morrison continued, is that they only work if you're alive to cash them in. Your brother learned that lesson 3 months too late. Sarah's mind raced, calculating distances, angles, possibilities. The Blackwood files were scattered across the floor around her, evidence of a conspiracy that reached far deeper than she'd imagined. But more importantly, they were evidence that Marcus had been trying to protect her all along. He made copies, didn't he? She said, more statement than question. That's why you can't just kill us both. Marcus made sure that if anything happened to him, the real story would come out. Morrison's smile faltered for just a moment, long enough for Sarah to know she'd guessed correctly. Where are they, Detective Chen? Where are Marcus's insurance files? I don't know, she lied smoothly. Maybe you should ask him yourself. I hear he's been quite active lately. The sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere in the building above them, sharp cracks echoing through the ventilation system. Morrison and his men tensed, hands moving to weapons. Lockdown protocols are now in effect, came a voice over the intercom. But it wasn't the dispatcher's voice. It was Marcus. All personnel remain at your current positions. This is not a drill. The lights went out, plunging the evidence lockup into absolute darkness. In the chaos that followed, Sarah heard Morrison shouting orders, the scrape of metal against concrete, the distinctive sound of someone moving through the shelving with predatory precision. A single gunshot rang out, followed by a grunt and the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. When the emergency lighting kicked in 30 seconds later, Sarah found herself face to face with her supposedly dead brother, standing over Captain Morrison's unconscious form like an avenging angel dressed in tactical gear. Hello, Sarah, Marcus said, pulling off his night vision goggles. We need to talk. The abandoned subway tunnel beneath the city stretched endlessly into darkness, its walls sweating condensation that caught the beam of Marcus's flashlight like tears. Sarah walked beside her brother, her living, breathing, very much not dead brother, trying to process the impossible reality of the past 6 hours. The car accident was staged, Marcus explained, his voice echoing off the tunnel walls. Federal Marshals Witness Protection Program. The body you identified belonged to a John Doe from the morgue. Similar build. Facial reconstruction after a fire made him malleable for our purposes. Our purposes? Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. Marcus, I grieved for you. I spoke at your funeral. I know. He stopped walking, turning to face her with eyes that held depths of pain she'd never seen before. Do you think this was easy for me? Watching you cry over my grave while I hid in a safe house, knowing that reaching out to you would get us both killed? Then why come back? Why risk everything now? Marcus pulled out a tablet, its screen illuminating their faces with cold blue light. The display showed a complex web of connections. Names, photographs, financial records all linked together in a pattern that looked like a spider's web of corruption. Because they broke the deal first, he said grimly. The arrangement was simple. I disappear, they leave you alone, and the Blackwood investigation dies with me. But 3 days ago I discovered they've been planning to eliminate you anyway. You knew too much, had access to too many files, posed too much of a long-term risk. The tablet screen showed a surveillance photo of Sarah entering her apartment taken just 2 nights ago. Across the bottom, someone had written, "Target acquired. Awaiting authorization." They were going to make it look like suicide, Marcus continued. Guilt over your brother's death, the stress of the job, maybe throw in some manufactured evidence of depression or substance abuse. Clean, simple, believable. Sarah felt the walls of the tunnel closing in around her. How do you know all this? Because I've been working with someone on the inside. Someone who's been feeding me information for months. Marcus hesitated as if weighing his words carefully. Someone you trust completely. Before Sarah could ask who he meant, footsteps echoed from the darkness ahead of them. A figure emerged from the shadows and Sarah's world shifted once again. Detective James Rodriguez stepped into the light. But his familiar face wore an expression she'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, utterly without the warmth she'd come to associate with her partner of 3 years. "Hello, Sarah," James said, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "I was wondering when you'd piece it together." The betrayal hit Sarah like a physical blow. "James, you're the one who's been keeping your brother alive, yes, but also the one who's been reporting your every move to Morrison's people." He shrugged apologetically. "It's complicated." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Sarah. "That wasn't the deal, Rodriguez. You said you'd protect her." "I tried," James replied. "But orders changed. The operation's been compromised and now everyone involved needs to disappear. Permanently." Sarah's mind reeled as the pieces fell into place. "You've been playing both sides." "I've been surviving," James corrected. "Do you have any idea how deep this conspiracy goes? We're not talking about a few dirty cops skimming drug money. This is organized crime, political corruption, federal agencies all working together to control half the city's infrastructure." He pulled out his own tablet, showing them a different set of files. The Blackwood murders were just the tip of the iceberg. Vincent Blackwood wasn't a random businessman. He was the accountant for the entire operation. When he decided to grow a conscience, they eliminated him and made it look like he was the first victim of a serial killer. "But he was still alive when the investigation started," Sarah protested. "I remember the missing person reports, the family interviews. All fabricated," Marcus said quietly. Blackwood was already dead. They just needed a convenient story to explain the systematic elimination of everyone who could testify about the money laundering, the rigged contracts, the murdered witnesses. James nodded grimly. "Your brother got too close to the truth. When he started connecting the dots, they had to take him off the board. But killing a police detective would have attracted too much attention, so they faked his death and bought his silence with threats against you." "Then why are you both here now?" Sarah demanded. "If the arrangement was working, if everyone was staying quiet." "Because someone started killing the kill team," Marcus interrupted. "The 3 bodies in the warehouse. They were the specialists brought in to handle loose ends, including us. Someone's cleaning house, eliminating everyone who knows about the conspiracy." James's tablet chimed with an incoming message. His face went pale as he read it. "We need to move now." He was already backing toward the tunnel entrance. "They've found us." The sound of vehicles screeching to a halt echoed from above, followed by the distinctive crack of tactical teams deploying. Sarah realized with growing horror that the abandoned subway entrance wasn't as secret as they'd believed. "How did they?" she started to ask, but Marcus was already pulling her deeper into the tunnel. "James," he called over his shoulder. "You with us or against us?" James hesitated for a moment that felt like an eternity, then drew his weapon and moved to cover their retreat. I guess I'm done playing both sides. The tunnel erupted with the sound of gunfire as tactical teams poured through the entrance behind them. Sarah ran through the darkness, her brother's hand gripping her wrist while bullets sparked off the concrete walls around them. But even as they fled through the underground maze, one thought consumed her. If James had been working both sides of the conspiracy, and Marcus had been presumed dead for 3 months, then who had killed the warehouse team? Who was cleaning house, and what did they want with the Chen siblings? The service tunnels beneath City Hospital formed a labyrinth that predated the subway system by decades. Marcus led Sarah through passages he seemed to know by heart, their footsteps muffled by years of accumulated debris and the distant hum of mechanical systems. How do you know your way around down here? Sarah panted, trying to keep up with her brother's urgent pace. I've been living in these tunnels for 2 months, Marcus replied without slowing. Ever since my federal handlers disappeared and I realized the witness protection program had been compromised, they emerged into a wider chamber that had been converted into a makeshift living space sleeping bag, battery-powered lanterns, walls covered with surveillance photos and connection charts that made the evidence room look like a child's art project. But it was the figure standing in the center of the room that made Sarah's blood freeze. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the medical examiner who had performed Marcus's autopsy, stood with her arms crossed, very much alive and looking nothing like the mild-mannered forensics expert Sarah remembered. About time, Elena said, checking a tactical watch that definitely hadn't been part of her morgue attire. We have maybe 10 minutes before they breach the hospital's lower levels. Sarah's world tilted again. Dr. Vasquez? How are you, dead? Yeah, I got that a lot lately. Elena moved with the fluid precision of someone with military training, gathering files and equipment with practiced efficiency. Elena Vasquez died in a car accident 2 weeks ago. Funeral was lovely, I heard. Marcus was already packing the most critical documents. Sarah, meet Agent Catherine Wells, FBI Joint Task Force on Organized Crime. She's been coordinating the real investigation into the Blackwood conspiracy for the past 18 months. The body's in the warehouse, Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. That was you, Catherine. Elena nodded grimly. Morrison's cleanup crew. They were good, professional assassins with federal credentials and unlimited resources. But they made one mistake. They assumed I was actually dead instead of deep undercover. How many of us are there? Sarah asked, looking between her supposedly dead brother and the supposedly dead medical examiner. How many people have faked their deaths to investigate this thing? More than you'd think, fewer than we need, Catherine replied. The conspiracy goes deeper than any of us initially realized. We're not just dealing with local corruption. This is a federal operation that's been running for over a decade. She pulled up a holographic display from a device Sarah had never seen before, showing a 3-dimensional map of connections that made Marcus's charts look simplistic. Vincent Blackwood wasn't just an accountant, Catherine continued. He was the record keeper for a joint task force between federal agencies and organized crime families. They've been using legitimate law enforcement resources to eliminate witnesses, manipulate evidence, and control entire investigation pipelines. That's impossible, Sarah protested. The FBI doesn't officially sanction these operations, no. But when individual agents start taking money from crime families, when federal prosecutors start throwing cases, when witness protection becomes witness elimination, Catherine shrugged. The line between law enforcement and organized crime becomes very thin. Marcus pulled Sarah aside while Catherine continued packing. There's something else, Sarah, something I haven't told you yet. The tone of his voice made her stomach clench. What? The reason they wanted both of us dead. It's not just because we stumbled onto their operation. He pulled out a photograph, their father in his police uniform shaking hands with a man Sarah didn't recognize. Dad was part of this, has been for 20 years. The photograph felt like a physical blow. Their father, Detective Captain Michael Chen, had been Sarah's hero, the reason she joined the force. The idea that he could be involved in the very conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives was almost incomprehensible. That's not possible, she whispered. Dad's been retired for 5 years. He's been coordinating the entire West Coast operation from his retirement home in Sacramento, Marcus said gently. The nursing home visits, the Sunday dinners, the family gatherings, it's all been a cover for status meetings. Catherine's voice cut through their conversation with military precision. We need to move. Thermal sensors show tactical teams entering the hospital basement. But as they prepared to flee deeper into the tunnel system, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed their father's number. Don't answer it, Marcus warned. Sarah looked at the phone, then at her brother, then at the FBI agent who was supposed to be dead. No, she said quietly. I think it's time we had a family conversation. She answered the call and put it on speaker. Sarah, sweetheart, I need you to listen very carefully. Their father's voice was calm, controlled, but underneath she could hear something she'd never heard before. Fear. Your brother is alive and he's in serious danger. There are people trying to kill both of you, and the only way I can protect you is if you come home. Right now. Protect us? Sarah's voice was steady despite the chaos around her. Like you protected the Blackwood witnesses? Like you protected all the people whose murders Marcus uncovered? A long pause stretched over the connection. When their father spoke again, his voice had changed, become older, wearier, stripped of pretense. So you know, he said simply. We know enough, Marcus said, leaning toward the phone. Hi, Dad, miss me? More than you'll ever understand, son. The pain in Michael Chen's voice was unmistakable. I thought you were safe. I thought the arrangement would hold. I never wanted either of you involved in this. But we are involved, Sarah said. The question is, are you going to help us or are you going to try to stop us? Another pause. This one filled with the weight of 20 years of choices and their consequences. Neither, their father said finally. I'm going to do something I should have done years ago. I'm going to end this. The line went dead, and Catherine grabbed both siblings by the shoulders. Whatever your father's planning, we can't wait around to find out. The thermal signatures are getting closer, and I don't have enough ammunition to fight our way through an entire tactical team. But as they prepared to flee deeper into the underground maze, Marcus stopped at one of his surveillance monitors. The screen showed the hospital's main entrance, where a figure was walking calmly through the front doors, despite the obvious law enforcement presence surrounding the building. Detective Captain Michael Chen, looking exactly like the hero Sarah had always believed him to be, walked through the hospital lobby as if he owned it. Behind him, the tactical teams were mysteriously backing down, receiving orders that were clearly countermanding their previous instructions. What's he doing? Sarah whispered. Catherine checked her tactical display, then looked up with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. He's calling in favors. Every favor he's earned over 20 years of keeping other people's secrets. Will it work? That depends, Catherine replied, on whether he's willing to burn down everything he's built to save his children. Outside, sirens were wailing as emergency vehicles surrounded the hospital. But they weren't tactical teams anymore. They were evacuation units clearing the building for reasons that would probably never make it into any official report. Michael Chen was cleaning house, and Sarah was beginning to realize that her father's version of cleanup might be far more devastating than anything the conspiracy had planned. The abandoned warehouse on the docks at midnight was a cliché, but clichés existed for a reason. They worked. Sarah stood between her brother and the FBI agent whose death had been greatly exaggerated, watching their father walk across the empty space like a man approaching his own execution. Behind him came figures Sarah recognized from news reports and police department ceremonies. Police Commissioner Janet Morrison, Captain Morrison's sister. She now realized. District Attorney Richard Stavros, Federal Prosecutor Amanda Cross, and a woman in an expensive suit whose face Sarah couldn't place, but whose posture screamed high-level government. The family reunion I never wanted, Marcus muttered under his breath. Their father stopped 20 feet away, his hands visible and empty. Sarah, Marcus, I need you to understand that everything I did, every choice I made was to keep you safe. Safe? Sarah's voice echoed in the cavernous space. Dad, people are dead. Dozens of people. Witnesses, investigators, innocent civilians, all dead because of this conspiracy you've been part of. Not part of, Michael Chen corrected, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I've been trying to control it, to limit the damage, to protect the people I could protect while gathering evidence to eventually bring it all down. Commissioner Morrison stepped forward. her resemblance to her dead brother unsettling in the harsh warehouse lighting. Detective Chen, your father has been working with us for 2 decades to maintain stability in this city. The alternative to controlled corruption is chaos. Controlled corruption? Agent Wells Catherine laughed bitterly. Is that what you call systematic murder? The woman in the expensive suit finally spoke, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Agent Wells, you were declared dead for a reason. Your investigation was terminated because it threatened a delicate balance that keeps this city functional. Who are you? Sarah demanded. Deputy Director Margaret Hayes, Department of Justice. And you, Detective Chen, are about to learn why some secrets are meant to stay buried. Hayes pulled out a tablet, its screen displaying a map of the United States with red dots scattered across major metropolitan areas. The Blackwood operation isn't unique to this city. It's a pilot program that's been implemented in 17 major urban centers across the country. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. You're talking about a national conspiracy. We're talking about controlled stability, Hayes corrected. Organized crime exists whether we acknowledge it or not. The question is, do we let it operate in chaos or do we establish parameters that limit collateral damage while providing law enforcement with actionable intelligence? Marcus stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. You're partnering with the people you're supposed to be arresting. We're preventing wars, District Attorney Stavros interjected. Do you have any idea what this city looked like 15 years ago? Drug wars, territorial disputes, civilian casualties in the hundreds. The Blackwood arrangement brought peace. At the cost of justice, Sarah said. Justice is a luxury, Commissioner Morrison replied. Order is a necessity. Their father had been silent during this exchange, but now he moved to stand beside his children. Which brings us to why we're all here tonight. The arrangement is over. I'm calling in every favor, every piece of leverage I've accumulated over 20 years, to ensure my children walk away from this alive and free. Hayes smiled, but it was the cold expression of someone holding a winning hand. Captain Chen? You seem to be under the impression that you have a choice in this matter. I have information on every operation this task force has conducted for the past 2 decades, Michael Chen said steadily. Every murder, every cover-up, every federal crime committed in the name of controlled stability. If anything happens to Sarah or Marcus, that information gets released to every major news network simultaneously. You're bluffing, Commissioner Morrison said, but her voice lacked conviction. Michael pulled out a device Sarah didn't recognize, some kind of dead man's switch. Sarah, Marcus, Agent Wells, you have 60 seconds to walk out of here. If my heart stops beating, if this device doesn't receive a reset signal every 12 hours, if I disappear or have an accident, everything goes public. Dad? No. Sarah started toward him, but he held up his other hand. This is my choice, sweetheart. My penance for 20 years of telling myself I was doing the right thing while good people died. He looked at his children with an expression of profound love and regret. You deserve better than the world I helped create. Agent Wells was already moving toward the exit, pulling both siblings with her. We need to go, now. But Deputy Director Hayes wasn't finished. Captain Chen, you're making a serious mistake. The people you're trying to protect will never be safe as long as they know what they know. There will always be pressure to eliminate them. Then make sure that pressure doesn't result in action, Michael Chen replied. Because I've spent 20 years learning everyone's secrets, and my insurance policy extends far beyond this city. As they reached the warehouse exit, Sarah heard her father's voice one last time. Take care of each other, and remember, sometimes the only way to fight monsters is to stop feeding them. The doors closed behind them, and Sarah found herself in the passenger seat of Agent Wells's vehicle, speeding through empty streets while her brother coordinated with federal contacts on a secure phone. Where are we going? Sarah asked. Safe house in Nevada, Catherine replied. At least until we figure out what your father's endgame actually is. You don't think he's just trying to protect us? Catherine glanced at her through the rearview mirror. Sarah, your father just declared war on a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Either he's planning something much bigger than witness protection, or he's about to become the most wanted man in America. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The sins of the father don't have to become the sins of the children. But justice delayed is justice denied. Choose wisely. A friend. She showed the message to Marcus, who went pale. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I don't think Dad is trying to end the conspiracy." "What do you mean?" "I think he's trying to take control of it. The safe house in Nevada was actually a decommissioned missile silo converted into a high-tech bunker that belonged to a government agency Catherine couldn't or wouldn't identify. Sarah spent her first night underground staring at concrete walls and trying to reconcile the father she'd always admired with the man who had just held a federal task force hostage with 20 years worth of blackmail material. "The text message bothers me," Marcus said, pacing the common area while Catherine worked at a bank of computer monitors. "Who else knows we're here? How did they get Sarah's number? And what does choose wisely even mean?" Catherine paused her typing. "It means we have bigger problems than your father's power play." She turned one of the monitors toward them, displaying what looked like a news feed. But instead of typical broadcast journalism, this was raw intelligence data. Intercepted communications, satellite surveillance, financial transaction records. "Your father didn't just blackmail Deputy Director Hayes last night," Catherine continued. "He's been systematically activating sleeper assets across the country. Every dirty cop, every compromised prosecutor, every federal agent who's been taking money from organized crime, they're all suddenly moving into position." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "Position for what?" "A coup," Marcus said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Dad isn't trying to expose the conspiracy. He's trying to replace it with something he controls." The monitor showed a terrifying pattern emerging across the United States. In 17 major cities, law enforcement officials were simultaneously arresting organized crime figures, but not the ones they'd been partnering with. Instead, they were eliminating independent operators, consolidating power under a single organizational structure. "The Blackwood operation was never about controlling crime," Catherine said grimly. "It was about creating a national infrastructure that could be activated all at once. Your father spent 20 years building a network that spans federal agencies, local law enforcement, and organized crime families." "But why?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. Catherine pulled up another screen, financial records showing massive transfers between government accounts and offshore holdings. Because someone offered him enough money and power to make it worth compromising everything he'd ever claimed to believe in. "No," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Dad wouldn't. The safe house in Nevada was actually a decommissioned missile silo converted into a high-tech bunker that belonged to a government agency Catherine couldn't or wouldn't identify. Sarah spent her first night underground staring at concrete walls and trying to reconcile the father she'd always admired with the man who had just held a federal task force hostage with 20 years worth of blackmail material. "The text message bothers me," Marcus said, pacing the common area while Catherine worked at a bank of computer monitors. "Who else knows we're here? How did they get Sarah's number? And what does choose wisely even mean?" Catherine paused her typing. "It means we have bigger problems than your father's power play." She turned one of the monitors toward them, displaying what looked like a news feed. But instead of typical broadcast journalism, this was raw intelligence data. Intercepted communications, satellite surveillance, financial transaction records. "Your father didn't just blackmail Deputy Director Hayes last night," Catherine continued. "He's been systematically activating sleeper assets across the country. Every dirty cop, every compromised prosecutor, every federal agent who's been taking money from organized crime, they're all suddenly moving into position." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "Position for what?" "A coup," Marcus said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Dad isn't trying to expose the conspiracy. He's trying to replace it with something he controls." The monitor showed a terrifying pattern emerging across the United States. In 17 major cities, law enforcement officials were simultaneously arresting organized crime figures, but not the ones they'd been partnering with. Instead, they were eliminating independent operators, consolidating power under a single organizational structure. "The Blackwood operation was never about controlling crime," Catherine said grimly. "It was about creating a national infrastructure that could be activated all at once. Your father spent 20 years building a network that spans federal agencies, local law enforcement, and organized crime families." "But why?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she already knew the answer. Catherine pulled up another screen, financial records showing massive transfers between government accounts and offshore holdings. Because someone offered him enough money and power to make it worth compromising everything he'd ever claimed to believe in. No, Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Dad wouldn't. And suddenly Sarah understood why someone had been calling themselves a friend. Because in a world where everyone was playing multiple sides, where death could be faked and loyalty was a commodity to be bought and sold, the only friend she could trust was someone who had no reason to exist at all. You've been watching us, she said, not really a question. I've been waiting, Director Harrison replied. Waiting for the moment when someone in your family finally chose justice over survival. He gestured toward a helicopter waiting in the darkness beyond the bunker. Your father's plan goes into effect at dawn. If we don't stop him in the next 6 hours, 20 years of careful work to actually expose this conspiracy will be destroyed. What careful work? Harrison smiled grimly. Did you really think your father was the only one playing a long game, Detective Chen? The helicopter flight back to the city gave Sarah 30 minutes to process information that reframed everything she thought she knew about the past.